and introduce us. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It. We're here to investigate incest and destigmatize childhood sexual crimes. Many people don't want to talk about it. We do. With me today is Shannon Page. I'm very excited to have Shannon here. Shannon is a certified peer specialist and survivor as well. Shannon does a lot of advocacy work in our community, and she founded Surviving Childhood Trauma, and she shares thoughts over coffee, which I enjoy and I follow myself. She runs a survivors circle. It's an online peer support group. She does one-on-one mentoring and much, much more. I like to start these because I hear so many times people wonder why we share, Shannon. And so I always like to start with this, even though, as I always say, they share their stories all the time, but they don't really want us to share our stories. So I want you to bring us in with your motivation to be here today and all the work that you do around advocacy. If you could let us know that motivation, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of your show. I'm really happy to be here. And this is actually a great starter question because it's the exact reason that I'm here to share my story, to talk about what my healing journey has been like. I share because, at least now, because it is so important, because our stories are so powerful, because sharing a shared lived experience and connecting with someone through a shared lived experience, especially one like those that we've experienced through childhood abuse and sexual abuse. There's just something really, I call it magical, because most people in the world, I guess I should, I just feel like most people in the world don't understand. There's a very select few of people that really understand what it's like to be a survivor of childhood abuse, of childhood sexual abuse, of incest. Incest to me adds like a whole other layer to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It does.
Yeah. So
no,
that's
that's beautiful.
why I share.
I love that. And it's so true. And it's part of that destigmatizing why we should talk about these things. And I love to talk about, many of us are diagnosed with CPTSD. And that, is extended trauma, and people don't understand that. And one of the things that they learned through Vietnam vets coming back was that peer support groups, Shannon, were actually the number one thing to help us survive and actually thrive. And so that is why you and I are out here, and I love that. I like to also now go back into your story a little bit, just share what you're comfortable with, but so that people understand your story. So just kind of bring us back to what your childhood looked like, what that was for you.
Yeah. So I could take up the entire hour just going through my first 14 years of life, right? So
sadly, right?
Let me try to hit the bullet points, and then maybe if you want me to embellish on some things, I can.
Okay.
So life for me started in grief. My mom passed away when I was born. There were complications during birth. She went into a coma. I've heard mixed stories on whether she got to see me or not. So I actually have no idea if she and I ever had any type of connection prior to her death. So when I was about 3, my dad moved us from California, where we were living, to Washington State, where his family lived. So I had left my mom's side of the family, and then kind of just lived a very isolated life in a small area of Washington State with my dad, his siblings, and his parents. My grandfather, my dad's dad, molested me most of my life. My dad was neglectful. He was emotionally abusive. He protected his father. That was how he abused me, was through just not protecting me, through giving me this life of, unpredictability and frightening. I remember having dreams, like nightmares as a kid, waking up and then just calming myself back down. So there was really no safety for me growing up. I didn't have a parent that I could go to. So fast forward, that was my childhood. Lived with my dad, molested by my grandpa. My dad did nothing. I spoke up numerous times as a child, to no avail.
And
So then at
how old were you when that abuse started?
So I don't remember the actual age. I've
Yeah,
stories that I
it's
spoke up
hard.
in kindergarten, that was the first time I said anything out loud to school officials. So I'm
Okay.
gonna say, you know, as early as kindergarten.
Okay.
I moved to where my grandfather lived at age 3. So sometime between the ages of 3 and 5 is when everything began.
And did your father and grandfather, did you guys live with your grandfather or did you visit
No,
your grandfather?
we lived right down the road, so we visited
Okay.
all the
Okay.
time, right? So I grew up in Section 8 housing. My dad was unemployed most of my life. We lived off of welfare programs and, social service programs. And so I just remember being at my grandparents all the time. That's pretty much where we had dinner, like every night was
Right.
up the road to grandma and grandpa's house. So
Okay.
yeah.
So go ahead and continue. Then you were going to say in your teen years.
Yeah, so about age 12 is when it ended, because I actually have a memory of telling my grandpa that I had heard from someone at school what we did was not okay and that I didn't want to
Mm,
do that with him anymore. Um, Between age 12 and age 14, my dad, at least I think it was age 12, but somewhere in there, my dad got a job and then he lost it. We moved and then we lost our home. And there was suddenly a bunch of instability in our housing. We moved in with my aunt
mm,
for a short time, and we were on the verge of becoming homeless. So I got in touch with my mom's parents in California, and asked if I could go live with them. This was at age 14.
mm,
And their answer to me was that if I came, because I was 14, right? And at that point in my life, my dad was my hero. And I was just like, we were going through some stuff, right? Like, we just needed a place to live. So I called my grandparents and was like, maybe if I can stay with you until he gets on his feet again, then I can come back. But my grandparents said, if you come till you're 18.
mm.
And so I made that choice at 14. I say that loosely because I don't really remember making that choice, but I know that I was supported in making that choice by my aunt. And I have my theories on why. We can get into that later.
Right. Right.
Um, so I made the decision. I told my father. He signed custody of me over to my grandparents. And at 14, my guardianship was transferred and I left Washington State, moved in with my grandparents. That was probably the most stable 2 years of my life. They were really wonderful people. Both my grandparents, I've lost them since, but that was probably the most stable my life ever was during my teenage years. But it was also some of the most traumatic years. I disclosed to my grandma at some point in the first few months. I don't really remember it. I don't know why. But she was the first person to believe me, first person to do anything about it. So I was immediately whisked into therapy. The therapist was a mandated reporter. And the next thing I knew, between the ages of 14 and about just shy of my 16th birthday, I was caught up in the investigation and trial against my grandfather.
Mm.
So I went through all of that. Long story short, the key parts of the trial, my father was a sworn witness for the defense. And when it came to my aunt was a witness for my side because she was also a victim of my grandfather. It was her dad.
Okay.
And then the trial ended with my grandfather's suicide. So
Before the trial was over, he committed suicide.
yeah, he shot himself the
Oh,
morning I was
Shannon.
scheduled to testify. So yeah,
You cut out right there. Can you say that
so
response again?
yeah, no, he shot himself the morning I was scheduled to testify.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow.
So
So, wow, that's a heavy story. That's a heavy story. And so, I guess I want to talk to you about this a little bit because you say that you enter into therapy, but you really enter into litigation
mhm,
because when you're litigating, you're not healing. You're kind of in
mhm,
this battle that really isn't yours to fight, but you have to
yeah.
fight it, right? So what did that feel like then to become adversarial against the very people that you love? Because the complicated part about incest is this is our family.
Mhm.
and we love the people that we come from, right? So it's
Yeah.
so now you're just adversarial, and that's got to be a conflict.
So it was, obviously at this point I've already spoken up a few times and my family's denied that reality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I think back about on it, I don't actually remember feeling much of anything. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I believe when I really kind of look back at the whole of the experience, because I don't have much memory of it at all. I think that I was just as dissociated through the trial as I
Right.
was through my early years of abuse. It was at that point in my life just as traumatic. Because my dad was already estranged from me. I had left him and moved in with my grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
and within the first couple months, he just stopped talking to me. He said some
Mm-hmm.
pretty horrible things on the phone, called me some names, and then that was it. So, um,
Had you
yeah. So
anti-
I
had you anticipated when you told your grandmother that your father, whether I mean, maybe the better word than anticipation is, did you hope that your father would come around you when you told and that you were believed? Was there a hope in you that he would stand behind you and defend you?
I don't. That's I don't know. I don't know. I don't I don't have much
Yeah.
connection to myself
Mm-hmm.
at that point. I know what I went through, but
Mm-hmm.
remembering myself in those moments, um I don't know that I ever had any type of connection to my emotions at that point. So
Mm-hmm.
um I think I don't think that I was thinking anything at that point
Right.
about
Boy,
my dad.
right. Shannon, you know what you just said about emotions is almost there's these themes that come up that I'm noticing in these interviews, and one of them is coming through this kind of trauma. We don't have emotions like normal people.
Mm-mm.
I put my emotions in a tool belt, so to speak, and it was like, what tool do I pull out? What am I supposed
Yeah,
to show other people? Because I certainly didn't have a response. We couldn't afford emotions, right? If we had
yeah,
emotions, they would have taken us out. And so
yeah,
mostly we felt numb. Does
yeah.
that resonate with you somewhere?
No, it 100%. I actually for a long, long time believed that I had written about the trial about a week later in my diary.
Mm,
And in my early days of healing, I went back into my diary and looked and found that I actually wrote it the day it happened.
wow.
I wrote about it the
Wow.
very day it happened, and in writing about it, I actually gave myself information about the 3 days that I was in Washington that I didn't remember. Because I mean, as hard as I try, like the holes in my memory are just so intense. I don't know if I'll ever get them back. I've got
Hmm.
also time isn't on my side either as the years continue to add on. Um, but no, I don't know that I had any hopes that my dad was going to come around. I mean, he at that point we'd been estranged for quite some time. Um, I will say I did not, as much as I wasn't, I don't think waiting for him to come save me. I was very devastated and
Hmm.
extremely shocked when I found out that he was testifying for my grandfather. Because I didn't find that out until later on into the process of the investigation. And that was probably one of the most shattering moments, like pivotal
Right.
moments, probably as far as like changing, like perceptions of life and people and,
Hmm.
safety and stuff. Um, that's actually a, a part of my story that I'm working on in EMDR therapy right now is specifically the image I have of myself in the conference room when I found out about that.
And it's huge betrayal. And do you mind if I read what you posted today about that EMDR session?
Oh, sure.
Is that
So
okay?
yeah, today was my second, or yesterday was my
Yes,
second one.
the reason that I want to share this with whoever's listening, and some of you are watching us, some of you are listening, but this was Shannon's post today, and that was just the perfect segue because I really want to read this. It says, last night was my second EMDR session. The plan was to continue reprocessing the memory and emotions from the week prior. My mind had other plans and instead threw up a wall of resistance. I spent my EMDR session last night leaning into my avoidance to see what I was protecting myself from. No matter what I did, I couldn't touch the emotions, the image, or the feelings from my session prior. And this is so huge, Shannon, because the more for myself, I mean, I was in therapy, pretty intense therapy for 20 years. I mean, with the murder and all of the stuff that I lived with, it took me genuinely 20 years. And so many of us get stuck in this moment. I can remember returning from exactly what you just said. I'm stuck in that conference room and I'm right there. And there was this one place I was stuck at. I was trying to get down the hall after the murder and I just wanted to get away from everybody. And I told Redmond, I keep staring at this hall. I keep staring at this hall. And after many sessions, you know what he said to me, Shannon? You have to tell yourself no one's coming, because I wanted comfort. I needed comfort. I hadn't eaten all day. I'm not even 4 yet. And you know, those moments, I guess I want us to talk a little bit about that stuck feeling. And it does come back to us, but you have to sit in that really odd feeling of numbness, right? And so they come into the conference room, they tell you your father is betraying you once again. And that violation was so profound. It was probably pivotal in your life, right?
Yeah. I would say that is the moment, like, I mean, I had many moments during childhood where my perceptions of the world were being altered and manipulated and influenced in maladaptive ways.
Mhm.
That though, I often feel that my dad's betrayal, his lack of protection, his lack
Mhm.
of support was what I feel like it fucked me up more than the actual abuse that my grandfather
Right?
did to me. Because if I had a parent to show up for me
Mhm.
sooner, things would have ended sooner. I would have had access to resources and
Mhm.
tools to begin healing sooner. Um, the betrayal trauma from my dad, in addition to all the neglect and the
Mhm.
emotional abuse and all of that stuff, has created some of the deepest, most negative beliefs in me that I
Mhm.
have to work on healing now. So that's where that image has come from, because I have so much tied into that image in that
Right.
courtroom from that
Right.
moment.
Counselors don't use these kinds of words that I use, but it's almost like your heart broke further. And you know,
Oh, shattered,
those broken heart,
shattered.
yes,
Mhm.
exactly. Those, and I understand that so deeply. But one of the things that I understand about incest, you said an interesting thing. And so I just want to go back to a factual statement you made. Your father's sister was molested by your grandpa. Is that what you said earlier?
Yes.
So here's the thing about incest. Your father, most pedophiles, and you can read studies, they don't usually skip one child. If a pedophile is molesting in a house, they are raping and molesting everybody. So it was most likely your father, his own denial of his own situation,
Mhm.
right? So your aunt stays out of denial, but your dad, and unfortunately denial breeds this darkness in people, and it's devastatingly hurtful. Denial is a really ugly sport
Mhm.
almost, right? And so when you're the object of that, it's a very cruel design. Denial is a very
Mhm.
cruel thing for the person who owns it and the person who stays in it. And so you know, many times in these stories, I like to ask, where was your mother? Your mother was never there. And so for you, you just never knew what comfort or protection felt like. And those are devastating things to lose in childhood. Like you talk about, um, you know, the abuse to our body is horrific. And I am not going to minimize that in any way, because
Right.
those are
Yeah.
horrific attacks. But
Mhm.
the horrible devastation on top of that, when you don't receive comfort or protection, it makes
Mhm.
us feel like the world, it doesn't exist in the world, right?
Well, right. Like, well, I was 100% not important enough. You
Right.
it would just solidify that I was strictly an object in my
Right.
family. I wasn't seen as, you know, like human. I
No
was just
worse.
there was, yeah. And
Right.
that
A
has
lot of,
really,
I'm sorry, continue.
I just said that is really, that's what's really stuck with me, is that message that you get, as a kid when you're being neglected like that.
Right. It's true. And, people talk about shame a lot, but you know what they don't talk about is worth. And
Mhm.
I didn't feel worth anything. And so I picked men who treated me like shit. They treated my children like shit. I didn't know
Mhm.
any better. Shannon, I really believed that I was kind of created for that. It was all I knew was somebody treating me horribly. And so I felt like my first husband, who was horribly abusive, was a lot better than my parents. And so it's all relative. But
Yeah,
sadly, I had no line of what worth felt like, what it felt like to be treated like you had worth.
yeah.
And that's even a deeper thing than shame. Shame, of course, we all know it's there and that's an ugly thing, but worth
Mhm.
really tells you have no value. And that, I don't know, it's extremely devastating. And your father then underlined that, italicized it, and bolded it when he said, "I'm going to testify against you." Those themes are absolutely devastating. And so, how beautiful that you had your grandparents. For me, my grandma was enough. I always think that there's always some angel in a corner somewhere that's fighting for us, that gives us enough worth to come out. And so was that your grandparents for you for sure? And did you stay with them then until you were 18? What happened then after the trial and your
Mhm.
grandfather then kills himself? What does
Yeah.
this look like now in your life? How do you go forward from that moment?
So, unfortunately, it didn't get any better for me for a
Yeah,
while. Um, you know, this all went down in the mid 90s. So it was long enough ago that we had no real resource. It was still very stigmatized. Nobody really talked about this
right.
kind of topic. So, I mean, there was barely enough resource for me as a I this all went my grandfather's suicide was a week before my 16th birthday.
Ah,
So there was
I'm
barely
so
enough
sorry.
resource. Yeah, thank you. Um, it's only now that it's really hitting me just how horrible that really is when I say it
Right,
out loud.
right.
I
Sweet
laugh about it, but
16.
like,
Think
yeah.
about that, right. People are
Yeah.
dreaming of picket fences and what they're going to wear to their sweet 16 party, and you and I are surviving, merely trying
Well,
to take our next breath.
I'll tell you, if I showed you the pictures from my 16th birthday party that following weekend, you would never think
Isn't
that
that
just five
crazy?
days prior, detectives had knocked on my hotel room a
Wow.
few states that, 1,000 miles away to tell me my grandpa just killed himself. So,
And
it's
and
just
stay right there for a minute. And you know why? I want to visit that for a minute, because what people don't understand is when they see our pictures, you're
Mhm.
smiling, you're happy, you're going to these things. What they don't understand is we're almost dead inside. And
Yeah.
I mean, almost dead. We are so numb, not comfortably numb, uncomfortably numb. There is no comfort in any of this, but we're just going through the motions. We
Yeah.
smile, we
When we
respond,
turn
but
off to it, you can't feel that,
yeah,
or it'll just
right. So
completely take you
so
under. You
talk
become
about right.
catatonic.
And
So,
talk about what that felt like when those officers came to your door and knocked on the door. Who was in the room
um,
with you? Were you there by yourself?
it was just me and my grandma. I'll be honest with you, I have like no memory of it.
Ah,
I went down for a continental breakfast. I think I brought a bagel or a muffin back to the room. Um, and then they knocked on the door. I I don't remember what they said. I just know what they came and told us. And
wow.
I don't have like I mean, we packed up, flew home from Washington back to California. I don't have memory of any of that. Like I said, I don't remember getting home and writing in my diary everything that had just happened that day.
Right. I understand.
I,
I
I
under
just
it's trauma amnesia, and it happens to every single one of us.
just I just
We
checked out completely.
Well, we simply can't take any more, Shannon. This is what people don't understand about trauma amnesia is it's the very act of helping ourselves survive that next day. You know how we make it? We don't remember. Because if
Yeah,
you remembered everything we lived through, we can't. We don't have
yeah,
the capacity in our being until we get tools later in life. There's
mhm,
just no capacity. There's no more capacity left in us, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, Basil Vanderkolk even talks about that. He has MRI studies to
Mhm.
back up the way that we turn our brains off for that
Right.
very reason as kids. There's no way to reconcile reality with how we have to live our life. I'm being treated
Exactly.
this way, but then I have to go and do, family functions or go out to the grocery store or whatever and act normal. So yeah, I don't really remember feeling anything, like, honestly, through the majority of my teenage years, which is probably why emotions are so intense and difficult,
Mhm.
and new for me now in my healing journey, because I'm only like 6 years into actual healthy
Well, and
emotional feeling, right?
right. And they feel
Versus,
very intense. I sometimes feel like a crybaby,
holy
and I
smokes.
still don't cry, but they feel very intense. So let's
Yeah.
talk about, so you go through these years, and you say only 6 years ago you started. So that's a long time from the time all of this abuse happens. So what happens in your life that
Yeah.
kind of pushes you in this direction where I need to step into my past? What does that look like for you?
Well, so a lot of things happened in the interim. So let me to go back to
Uh-huh.
16, within
Yes.
about 10 weeks, this happened in November, my grandfather's suicide. By the end of January, my guardianship was being transferred again because I was rebelling.
Oh,
My grandparents
no.
couldn't handle it. And I had connected with, I have a half sister, her and I have the same father. And that's a whole other story. We literally didn't know about each other until I didn't know about her until I was 10 years old.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so I ended up moving from California to Chicago at age 16 to live with her and her mom. And the next 18 months of my life, her mom moved us between 5 different states. Her mom was neglectful in her own right. There's a
Oh,
whole
no.
bunch of things that happened there that just reaffirmed not feeling worthy, not feeling good enough, not being lovable. A couple times she moved us. Once we were in Kentucky, she didn't like my behavior, tried to sign me over to the state.
Oh
Didn't
my
work,
gosh.
thankfully. Tried it again in Wisconsin, where I live now, and it didn't work again because I've never been like a threat to the household. I've always had a really sharp tongue. I've bucked authority and talked back and been snotty and rebellious.
Oh,
Um,
I can't imagine why, Shannon.
but
Come
never,
on.
never like I've never been like a violent kid. I've
Right.
never, I was always afraid, honestly, of
Right.
getting in
Yeah.
trouble. I've
Right.
always
So
been
was I.
terrified.
Right.
So at age 17, she kicked me out, moved in with a friend for a few months, met my first husband, like had a child very young, a young marriage that, was amazing and then ended just as fast as it began. It was great. And then it wasn't, it was almost like a trauma response, you
Right.
know?
Probably it was.
Um,
You, the first person that can help you, we just cling to, Shannon. That it's
yeah.
quite natural.
Oh yeah, got me out of the house.
Right.
And then, I the divorce happened within like 3.5 years. My oldest was like 2 or 3 years old at the time. I'd have to look at the actual years to figure out the days. And then I went into a long-term 8-year relationship with someone who was super emotionally unavailable, and it was a very unhealthy relationship. And through all these years, because of kind of like what you alluded to earlier, these unhealthy relationships where I'm not being treated well, I'm continually questioning my worth and feeling not good enough and adjusting myself and people pleasing, I had to stay dissociated. I could never touch any of my childhood trauma because there was no safety to work on it, because we need a
Right.
lot of space when we
We
start doing
do.
this work.
Yes.
So I met my husband 14 and a half years ago. It was after the 8-year relationship. We were together for 6 years when we had our daughter. And then we got married a year later. We got married like 8 months later. We got married a year later. And then shortly after that, our marriage started to ice out and hit the rocks, and things were getting weird. And um, the biggest hiccup was our intimacy. It changed
Mhm.
dramatically. I don't know exactly what it was. I think there was a number of triggers that happened: safe relationship,
Mhm.
space to be myself, birth of a new child. I actually happened to be working at a senior center at the time, so I was surrounded by a lot of older men and women that, I don't know, might have been reminding me of my grandparents. But all I know
Right.
is that in January 2017, hubby and I kind of had this like major blow up, and my response to him, even for me in that dissociated state, I knew just didn't make sense, and it was not healthy for our relationship, and I just couldn't figure it out. And I was sitting at work one day, and I hadn't talked to my husband for like 24 hours, right? Like I'm not making eye contact. I'm totally in this petulant mode of like just silent treatment, um echoes from my childhood. And it just hit me like, oh my God, is it really that? And I've been in and out of therapy all through
Mhm.
my 20s. I've regurgitated and recited my story with no emotion
Right.
or pause for like almost um like I've enjoyed watching therapists' jaws hit the floor, right? It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
I lived through that, totally disconnected from it.
Right.
Well, not this time. Not this time. I started Googling like, you know, symptoms of childhood sexual abuse in adulthood. Never in my life until I was 37 years old, and I went to the agency here in town that like was worked specifically with like domestic violence and survivors of childhood abuse, and like both children and adults. Never had I heard the word trauma survivor,
Mm.
PTSD. I've all my life, oh,
Mhm.
you're depressed. Duh.
Mhm.
Yeah, no.
Right, right.
Um, and so that's pretty much how it happened. I had three different guardianships through my life. Even though I never went into foster care, I feel like it's a little similar as far as being bumped around a lot and feeling like
Right.
nobody, wants you. And then once I got out of that, I spent another like 15 years in this dissociative survival mode, in unhealthy relationships
Right.
and workaholicking myself to death, trying to
Mhm.
just be good enough in life. Uh, and then I met a guy that just was like super awesome and opened up a lot of space. I sometimes jokingly blame him for like that was created in the days of my healing. Oh man, it got hectic. But that's pretty much what brought me to here. That's why there was so many years of
Okay.
dissociation and now 6 years of healing.
Okay. So did you stay with that? Is that the same husband and you guys worked through that, or is this a different relationship?
Yeah, so my
I
healing
could,
started with my current husband. Like
okay.
we were together for 7 years post pre-healing,
Okay.
and
Gotcha.
then
That's
and then we
awesome.
moved through my healing. He's been with me through
Okay.
all of it.
That's wonderful. And the funny thing is, Shannon, is that I didn't get into serious healing until I couldn't have a healthy relationship. And what brought me into serious commitment to healing was relationships. I genuinely wanted a loving relationship with a man. And I came in and said, I'm here because I don't know how to, connect to a guy. And then when they start hearing our stories, they're just like, that's what you're here for. But ultimately we do. We want to connect and we want love and we want to be like the guy next to us, even though we know we're not the guy next to us. But I had no idea where that journey would take me, honestly, including seeing that murder, like all of it. Cause I always knew I was in this room with them. I always knew something happened, but we just never go there. Right. And so then when you say, I'm just here to fix my relationship. Oh my God. It's like a bomb goes off. And then to explore one thing, you have to explore 12 things to get to that thing. Right. And then before you get to that, you have 20 other things that pop up. And,
Yeah.
so I kind of want to encourage you in that EMDR. I actually read that comment to my daughter because she's here visiting for a minute. And I loved that comment because so many people find themselves there. And with
Hmm.
my experience and the 20 years of really diving deep, like I stayed alone for 13 years to really jump in. I dated a little bit, but I didn't live with anybody for 13 years because I had some serious work to do on myself. I
Yeah.
found that those doors opened. They would just open. And sometimes when that block would come, I kind of was thankful for that because I'd had enough for a minute. You know what I mean? And then when it opened again, I was ready for that. I remember when my counselor said to me, Jody, your mom hated you. I didn't go back for a year. I couldn't. I knew what door was going to have to open when I opened that, because my mother was also a pedophile and was there a lot. But if I didn't open that door, it wasn't real, right, Shannon? And
Right.
so
Yeah.
sometimes we don't want to open those doors because we know the work that's going to be behind that door and the pain.
Hmm.
It's kind of like we don't want to step into that pain. And I think that our bodies and our minds connect us when we're there and we're in that good spot. You know what I mean? Where maybe that was enough the week before. And I think journaling helps it a lot too. Have you journaled through this time in your life? I can remember writing words like, where did that come from? I didn't even know it was in my being. So how did that work for you? Have you journaled?
Since last night's session,
No, I
or
mean
just
just
in general?
in your healing process.
My entire website, my thoughts over coffee, that is my journaling.
Oh, that's
I
cool.
that's pretty much my journaling. I mean, I do have private journals that I write thoughts and stuff down, and I have like my notepad on my phone that I'm always jotting thoughts and stuff down in. I have like a trauma folder.
Right? That's
So,
good.
um, but I but yeah, that's probably it. I do so much writing through my
Mm.
website and stuff. That's kind of like I journal to the public.
Right. And go ahead and tell everybody your website right now is a perfect time for that, because it's beautiful for anybody listening or watching. One of the things that she and I both do is we heal in real time with you, and we share what it feels like to be in that moment. It's very
Yeah,
different. I always believe that if you want to heal, talk to a trauma survivor.
yeah,
The people that are experts, they learn from our stories. And I'll
yeah.
tell you, I heal a lot talking with people like Shannon, that sort of thing. So go ahead and share that right now, and then we'll get back into our conversation. But I do, and I will put those links in everything so that they can follow you
Yeah,
as well. But go ahead and share that right now.
yeah, it's survivingchildhood.trauma.com.
I
It's
love that.
it's all of it. Well, so when I first started therapy in 2017, I knew I wanted to start writing about it. So I ran home and started a WordPress blog. And I was like, what am I going to call this? And that's what I felt like in that
Right.
moment, surviving childhood trauma. And I just got really lucky because I did that right before the boom of the internet and all this social media stuff. So I caught the name.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Oh, and I love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're very honest and you're very authentic. And
Thank
I think it's beautiful. The next thing I kind of want to talk about, because I'm not really sure where this fits in your story, but one thing I've really noticed is God, there's this big God wound in many of us. And whether you're atheist, whether it doesn't matter where you kind of come to the story, I think it's kind of a significant thing because, again, just like when you brought up, I love The Body Keeps the Score. I think it's one of the most profound books written around how our bodies respond. And just to do a nod to that, if you have a memory and you have no body feeling with it, you might want to question that memory. But most of the time, when you have a memory, your body is responding with that memory. And that's something that you shouldn't deny, and probably most likely cannot deny. But with that, there's this big God thing. So where was God in your childhood? Let's specifically start with your childhood. Did he play any role? Were
you.
you mad at him? Were you close to him? What did that look like for you?
I never had, like, for me, there was never any type of relationship with God. I didn't question him or think about it or anything like that. My family, we were active at a church. I actually went to preschool and kindergarten at the church. My dad worked in the light booth. There was like, I remember being in that church a lot. It was actually the first place I spoke up and the first place that my dad and grandma successfully got, officials to just believe I was a storyteller.
Oh, it's so
But
often the case.
I mean, that's pretty much it. God's never really been even honestly a thought for me. I've not ever really been a religious person. I've
Mhm.
got a religious family. My aunt, my dad's sister, is extremely religious, like to the point of fundamentalism. And before we before she started shaming me and saying horrible things about my healing journey and the fact that I'm sharing my story, we'd had some different interactions where at one point she stopped talking to me for a while because of political and religious differences. Um, she's really preachy
Wow.
at me about religion, and I'm just not, like, if that's not what I'm asking for, you
Right.
know, and
Right.
so she actually my aunt actually accused me of like attacking my cousin with some sort of evil entity in her sleep. Um,
Wow.
because my cousin was trying to
Wow.
speak God's word to me. So I mean, I guess I will say that God in general does not I don't have the best taste in my mouth for it
Mhm.
because that's what it brings up. But I
Right.
also
Well,
have, go
well, I
ahead.
mean, and just to pause for a minute, you said a lot actually.
Oh,
And much of this to me, I just want to stop on. I went to the church and I first told. Now there's a lot of people out there that write about this kind of thing. And this is one of the particular things that I want to talk about is that these secrets hide within the walls of these religious horseshit communities. And I'm going to call them that because they are. And I don't think God lives
yeah,
in a lot of these communities, but I do think that's important. I think it's really important to for anybody that's listening and watching. If the church is not trustworthy where you're at, do not trust the church. That is a fine thing to do. Go to anybody that'll listen. Go out on the street and tell anybody that you can that'll listen to you. But if a church quiets you, you're in the wrong church and you're in the wrong place. And
yeah,
kind of what you just talked about, Shannon, was you can't tell your story now that because this religious aunt is quieting your story. And I think that is foundationally wrong with everything as a human being. So anyway, I'm not going to
yeah,
get on my soapbox, but I think those are
no,
huge things that you just brought up. For
yeah.
many of us, that's the case. My father was in the church. It was Bible study in the front room, rape in the back room.
Oh my
And
goodness.
when
Yeah,
I talked to a pastor, he walked right past me and went to my father and said, "You need to know that you're loved right now." That's
yeah.
religious horseshit. So anyway, go ahead and continue, but I just wanted to stop on that for a minute.
No, and I believe when I reflect that my family used the church because we lived in a small town in a small community,
Right.
so it just makes them look good, right? To be regular Sunday goers. So
Right. And maybe
um,
I should change that to say where was religion in this because it
yeah,
always shows up. I mean, it
yeah,
seems like to me 90% of the time these guys use these religious cloaks somehow. And then the religious cloaked people hide this stuff. And these are crimes. These are not incest is not a family problem. Incest is a crime. And so,
crime. Yeah.
so many times, that happens. And so anyway, you go ahead and finish your last thoughts about that and we'll move on to our next one. But I think those were very significant things that you brought up.
Yeah.
But I don't like to lead with anything. So you go ahead and
Oh,
finish that.
well, no, it's just that's it, we weren't practicing at home. It's not like we didn't do Bible studies or prayer or anything like that. So
Right.
my family was very much just like surface. So
Right.
um so in that regard, because it wasn't this huge thing in I mean, I went to church camp once, I think, but I don't ever remember having honestly, I was literally this disconnected. They may have tried to condition me with religion and they may have been trying to kind of like, push that dogma on me, but I was just such a I don't remember any of that. I don't remember experiencing that. Um, and I mean, I remember I used to look at the sky as a kid and like imagine that maybe my mom wasn't dead and that she might come back for me. But that would probably be
Mhm.
like the closest to like any type of contextual like look up and ask for something. But I don't
Right.
think I was talking to God.
Right.
you
Right.
know.
Well, right. And that's a whole, it's hope of a child for sure. Yeah. And
But yeah,
that's fair. I mean, that's a fair experience. It's kind of like when you talked about, I was angry as a child. I mouthed off as a child. We
mhm,
of course we have anger in our souls. How you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that this and the other thing that I thought was significant about listening to your story, Shannon, was that you were making adult decisions. Well, firstly, the whole experience with your grandfather is adult like. So we become at 5 or 6 or whatever the age is, we become adult like. But then you're making these decisions for your life at 14, at 16, I mean, all of these things, it's the tattered soul that's left in us when we come through these experiences. I don't think that people give enough weight to. And the
yeah,
cost of that and the integrity and the strength it takes for us to begin to walk out of these situations, all of these things, God included, all of these things that are universal truths that people talk about. And we barely even begin thinking about these things because all we're trying to do is take our next breath,
Yeah.
our next step in life. Like people say, Jody, how do you do it coming through what you did? And you know what I say? One day at a time, because tomorrow
Yeah.
I can't go too far ahead and I can't stay in the past. I have to try to, you have to go in both places, right? Because we have hope for the future and our healing our past fix us. But I try to just stay in the moment of the day because that's where I find safety. It's where I
Yeah.
find I can, it's palatable for me right here, but I can't go too far back or too far forward. So,
Well, no, and just with that, I think that's it. It does speak to the truth that you said earlier. When one of the things I realized about my EMDR session was that um, I had done quite a bit the week before.
all right.
And I made a joke that my brain was like, oh, you caught me off guard last week with that session of EMDR, but you're
Right.
not going to fool me this week.
Right.
Because the couple seconds where I was almost able to touch any type of feeling, I never once through my EMDR session caught any images. A
Mm-hmm.
couple times I felt the growing wave, like a big, huge hurricane type wave or
Mm-hmm.
tsunami wave of emotion. And all I can ever say to my therapist is it feels like sadness, but I
Mm-hmm.
think there's like fear and overwhelm in there too.
Right.
So,
And I think that's really cool. I think sometimes we have done enough work and I would trust what your body's doing. I guess that's what I just want to say as a person who's
yeah.
lived through these experiences. And I remember it's funny you bringing that up. There was this man who my father allowed to be in the rooms with us and abuse us children together. And he was also there when they raped and murdered this woman. And so I was talking, I don't talk a lot about him very much, but this one day with my counselor, I said, Redmond, I have this feeling about him because he brought it up. Let's talk about Craig. And I said, well, I just have this feeling. And he did a very interesting thing because he had a degree in child psychology. He was a doctor. And he said, let's go over to the table, Jody, and I want you to pick up any color that you want and write it out. And you know what was weird, Shannon? I could pick that up. I picked up red and I was angry. I was so angry at him. And I don't like anger because anger lives in this place where you're going to be raped or murdered in my world. And so anger is a very frightening thing for me. But it all of a sudden I could feel anger and I could feel these things. And so I think it's very interesting, but not going too far down that rabbit hole because right, we can with our therapists. But a beautiful thing also that I think that we need to respect is maybe I've gone as much as I need to go, and we'll go next week. We'll see where we can go with that. Because sometimes
Mhm.
I walked into these offices and I'm here because I'm dedicated to this process, but I'm kind of out. Or I'd have a session where I walked out and there was the fog of PTSD everywhere. And I thought, oh,
Mhm.
I always scheduled them after work because I couldn't go back to work with any kind of wherewithal. You know what I mean? And I had a
Yeah.
pretty stressful job and I just couldn't step back into it. So I guess
Same.
I'm just saying, after reading that this morning, honor yourself. Only go as far as you can because sometimes, you know what? If it takes us 30 years to heal, so be it. Our
Right.
bodies will know. And then the other thing
Yeah.
you said that I thought was interesting, I love listening to people who've come through stories like mine because I have so much compassion and understanding around it. But you talked about just stepping in and out of your story. You can do that. And you said, I'm
Mhm.
getting older, so I don't know how much of my story I'll get back. I'm going to tell you some truth around that I've found. The older you get, the harder it is actually to deny and cover your story. And many people have to apply more alcohol, more, run more, shop more, dissociate more. I know people that actually go away from their children later in life because they can't handle it. So the
Mhm.
truth is, if you allow it as you get older, your mind kind of brings it back to you because it takes mental capacity to shut those things down. So it does get harder as we get older. So I guess I just wanted to encourage you that story is going to find you as long as you're willing and available. Mine finds me when I don't want it to, Shannon. Let me tell you. Sometimes
Yeah,
I just want to be like, could you just shut the hell up now? Because
yeah.
I don't really want that one.
I think what I mean by that though, like, and I get that because the more aware I become, the more receptive I
Mhm.
become.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's more like for me, I get messages through my behavior and my, like, the things that I
Yes.
feel in my body. And that's the
Mhm.
stuff that I work on in therapy more so than the flashback that I had or this memory that popped up.
Well,
I
explain that a little bit more. We have a few minutes here. I'd like you to explain that a little bit more. Bring us into that with you.
so in my early days of healing, like in that probably first 18 months, lots of memories because I
Mhm.
had absolutely blocked out a lot of stuff. So lots of mundane memories of childhood, as well as memories of abuse, memories of hurting myself. Um, but remembering things that my dad said, like survivors have like survivors that I've worked with and that stories that I've heard, they have these memories of being told they were not wanted or pieces of
Mhm.
shit, or
Right.
like they have these memories of the individual incidences of abuse, and like they have more wrapping memories of their childhood as far as how they felt or how they were in school, or I don't have that. I actually still don't remember my entire sixth grade year. I can't figure out who my teacher, like every time I try to like do my timeline, I hit this blank space where I
Mhm.
can't remember
Right.
where we lived, who my teacher was, what was going on. So when I say that I just feel like time is affecting my it in insofar, what I mean is that I feel like I have done so much work to close out
Mhm.
a lot of stuff that it is kind of lost in translation.
I get
But
that.
my stuff always comes up in real-time situations. So the reason I'm
Mhm.
doing EMDR right now, and the reason that the image is that courtroom, which is a memory I've had my whole life, it's not new,
Right. Right.
um, is because from the beginning of April until now, I have about 7 different incidents where I have become triggered into fight mode in public with
Mm.
a summer camp person, the bank teller, a hotel receptionist, the mechanic
Mhm.
that worked on my car, like, and it was getting to a point where, like, I mean, I have triggers. We all have triggers and I
Right.
work through
Right.
them, but it was happening a lot.
Right.
Like,
I get it.
where I'm going into therapy going, like, I get that I'm stressed, I moved and stuff, but
Mhm.
what is going
Mhm.
on right now? And so we dug into the belief behind that, which is that I'm not
Mhm.
lovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not being valued by these people, I'm not being listened to, I need to protect my family, or myself. And I dug into that and have gotten to this image of my dad and this feeling of betrayal and not being worthy or lovable, or, that I need to fight hard to protect myself because nobody else will. So that's kind of what I mean. Because even in my
Right. No, I get
EMDR,
it. It's good.
yeah, because even in my EMDR sessions, I do get cameos of memory, but I don't really have new memories coming up.
Mhm.
I might get connected to some new feelings that go with them,
Mhm.
but in general, um, there's just some things I mean, and maybe, I don't know, I'm only 6 years in, so talk to me in another
Mhm.
10 years.
Right, right. I know.
It's
Doesn't
very
that sound
possible.
terrible? You know, and I love that. And that's why I wanted you to explain to anybody listening what that feels like, because I can say 100% it felt the same for me. And I
Mhm,
remember, Shannon, looking at my therapist of years, and you really begin to love these people because they help you so
mhm,
much understand what your mind's doing. But I said to him, Redmond, is there an end point? Like, I'm so sick of this. Can I get over this? Like, I'm
mhm,
gonna get here and I'm done, right? And his answer was, Jody, I cannot tell you that at 80 you won't have some kind of flashback or some kind of trigger. And so our reality, honestly, when you step into the game of healing, but it's the same for any person that doesn't come from trauma, right? They get to
mhm.
smell something and say, oh, this reminds me of my grandma's house, and they could be
Yeah.
72. Well, that's a positive thing for them. Unfortunately, when we have years of extended trauma, we to live healthy in the most significant way, to be open and whole to our life experience,
Mhm.
that could happen to us, just like it happens where they remember driving through Nebraska when they're 11. That's just
Yeah.
what it looks like for us, right? And it's just a reality we have to live with. Do you agree?
100%. I think that healing is about the journey. It's not a
Yeah.
final destination. It's a daily
Right.
choice that we make every day
Yes.
to heal. Um, I always talk to survivors about this, that there
Mhm.
isn't some end goal. Because
Right.
healing is about self-empowerment and improvement and reflection and, self-discovery. Yes, we're also unpacking a lot of crap that really,
Right.
that the average person maybe doesn't have to unpack. But um, the radical acceptance of childhood trauma and the healing is that that's my childhood. It doesn't matter
Right. See,
how
and
old
right. And
I am, how long I've been
exactly.
doing this work. It was still my dad. It was still my grandfather. It
Right.
was still my aunt. That was still me. And so, EMDR helps because it's helping reprocess those memories the way that
Mhm.
they should be, right? Because trauma gets stuck in our brain in that limbic system. So, like, I am desensitizing myself to some stuff, but yeah, it doesn't suddenly go away. It's always there
Right.
in the rearview
It
mirror.
doesn't, but
And that's why we
right.
make that intentional choice, like you were
Yes,
saying, to
exactly.
stay
And
in the present.
it does. And if
Mhm.
you really think about it in kind of a logical way, we are normalizing our human experience. We are
Mhm.
allowing ourselves to live like everybody else does. Nobody else stops their brain every day. Nobody else says you got to put that memory away. Nobody else hears you can't share that. And
Yeah.
so what we're doing out here is we're normalizing our experience. They live normal. If something comes back to them, they're like, wow, you know what? That reminds me of, it's exactly what we're doing. When you
Yeah.
just did that, that reminds me of, but unfortunately, all of our memories are full of shit and chaos and destruction. And, very seldom we get good memories. I mean, I can remember popcorn and I remember
Yeah.
making, French toast, but that's not the bulk of our memory. So we're actually normalizing our human experience. We're living it like the next guy. And actually, Shannon, I think that's quite brilliant to think of it that way, because it's not that we're limping along. We're actually normalizing this human experience, right?
Well, yeah, because it
We are.
is a part of
Just
our story. It
right,
doesn't
exactly.
go away.
It
But
doesn't.
but when we heal, the edges soften, right?
Oh my God, 100%. I say fuck way less now than
Yeah.
I used to, because
Yeah.
there are just some emotions and some things that word
Mhm.
just suits so well that, you know what,
Yeah.
I'm trying to limit that in my life. But
Yeah.
we're at time, Shannon, but I like to give it back to the person I'm speaking with, just to say anything that you think that you may have missed, anything that you just want to leave. Sometimes these are the most beautiful thoughts that you bring out. So I'm just going to let you bring us out with anything that you'd like to leave.
Oh my goodness. No, honestly, I'm gonna probably just say what we just ended on.
Mhm.
Be patient with yourself, stay committed to the process, learn to trust yourself, trust your process, and everything will fall into place. It always does. The proverbial onion does peel at the
Yes.
speed that it's supposed to, right? Like, you
Yes.
will work through something and learn the tools to move through that, so that the next time the next level of something comes through, you have that toolkit established to build on. So, and I guess I would just reiterate what I said today. Don't It's easy to feel frustrated and discouraged when you feel like you're maybe taking a step back, or maybe you're not moving forward at the pace that you want to. I know that for me, EMDR last night was frustrating. I felt like my body was working against me, but just trusting myself and my process. Um, yeah,
I love it. Thank you
that's
so much for being here. That's
yeah.
absolutely beautiful. These will be up and the clips will coming. Thank you for being here with us today. Please follow and subscribe.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you later.